Hi, everybody. You're listening to Eve Harrow on Rejuvenation for the Land of Israel Network. And it is a beautiful day in Jerusalem, and I'm sitting here on Mount Scopus. I realized while I was walking here that I need to do a show just on Mount Scopus. It brings back memories. I was here at Hebrew University many, many years ago. But this place has so much history of the last century, when the university was started, what happened during the years of the Mandate and of the Jordanian occupation. But today I'm actually going to get much further back in history, and I'm really honored to be sitting with one of my favorite archaeologists, and I hope yours too, Dr. Eilat Mazar. So thank you, first of all, Dr. Mazar, for taking time away from your busy schedule to sit with me today.
My pleasure.
So Dr. Mazar is from an archaeological family, right? It's in your bones around the dining room table. You talked archaeology?
Well, yes, these are facts that it started when my grandfather, Professor Benjamin Mazar, a very famous archaeologist and historian of Jerusalem and of the Holy Land in general, and the history of, the people of Israel. And he was very, very much a family man, and us as children, since early childhood, he let us join him, and he talked to us, and we were in my grandmother's and my grandfather's home, and people used to come, scholars from all over the world, among them archaeologists. It's when I grew up, started to study archaeology, many of my teachers actually, as a child, I believe that these people are my aunts and uncles. As much as these people were close to a family, at that time, people used to come to the teacher's house or the mentor's house. The home of the teacher, of the professors, was kind of, it was part of the academic world. I believe it doesn't work that way today. Entirely different at that time. So especially my grandfather, who used to be the president of the Hebrew University for 10 continuous years, and it was even more than that. He was that was part of his nature. Like, it wasn't work. Archaeology wasn't working place. It was his life. And people used to come, scholars, people that they wanted to be part of, not only scholars. The seminars took place at my grandfather's home. So these people were in and out of his home, and I used to know them. And of course, this was part of a very large family, really. And in due time, when I became a student, of course, they became my teachers. They didn't make my life much easier. Sometimes even harder. I had to prove myself even more. But it was a kind of continuation. So that's a story that it started in early childhood and continued until nowadays.
Mm-hmm. A family that likes to play in the dirt, huh? In a simple way.
Well, you can say that, but it was in a much larger scale and understanding and the atmosphere and conception. This was kind of a way of life that archaeology, like as it's conducted in the field, is just very, not small portion, but it's a portion. It's only part of a very general, large picture of academic life, of the state of Israel, like it's part of what we are. It's part of what we are doing here in the land of Israel. It's a part of our history, but part of our history is understand and learn and appreciate the cultures that are part of our culture. In order to understand more, to learn, I think academic life in general, as they should be, as they are, understanding, learning cultures, and of course, specifically our culture, but nevertheless not kind of give less credits to the other cultures that influenced our culture, that were part of it, influenced it, that took place all around us. That's the way it should go. I mean, naturally it goes that way. It does. We don't have even to explain why it should be. It's obvious that it should be that way.
Well, I think it's obvious to you and to other Israeli archaeologists, but perhaps not as obvious to other people in the region who destroy archaeology that they feel doesn't pertain to their own personal history. Is Israel unique in that right now here in the Middle East, and also in terms of the access here to archaeology with all the different wars happening in other places?
Well, it's not, you're talking about very extreme events that took place recently, Daesh running, but we don't, no. I believe that it's a general conception that we're talking about cultures that were playing a role in the ancient Near East and appreciated and so on. Of course, when politics comes and involved, we're not talking about extremes. An everyday political approach, people trying to influence the studies, the understandings. But I like to believe that these are fashions, pass over, very temporary, but in general, serious scholars would not let themselves be influenced by politics and so on. They stick to facts. They conclude from facts, from understanding whatever it can be studied and solid evidence. That's why I keep my priority is to my excavations, and that I took responsibility over publications of my grandfather's excavations in Jerusalem. They excavated the 10 continuous years, huge amount of material, which they didn't have time to process the finds and publish. So I was nominated by the Hebrew University Institute of Archaeology to be responsible of the publication, processing the finds and publication from his excavations. And that's what we do. So it's my excavation and my grandfather's excavation just as well. First priority is to publish it, scientific publication. And that takes a lot of time. Really processing the finds, presenting it very accurately as it was excavated. And of course, at the bottom line, I take this privilege of presenting my understanding, but nevertheless, never influence or disturb the option for other people to conclude their own whatever they can. But because I give the very pure, clean evidence, a database of the excavation. And then, of course, other people can come forward and conclude whatever they seems to be correct. And I may be wrong, and they may prove me wrong. But the database very accurately, very highly skilled, studied and presented, that stands as it is, right? To be studied for everybody, to be studied for generations. And then, of course, the outcome and the conclusions, the interpretations, whatever, that can be changed. And whatever my interpretations and conclusions are, other people can come forward and can prove me wrong. And if they will, and I'll be convinced that that's science, and I'll be more than willing to change my mind or conception. And that happened all the time.
Mm-hmm. And also with new technology, sometimes you can take, say, a piece of pottery. I remember a few months ago it came out that there's pottery where there's writing on it, I believe from Tel Arad, and they flipped it now with new science. They thought the back was blank, and now they're able to see with infrared or whatever it is, different kinds of scopes. Now they're able to see that there was writing there that they didn't think was there before. So really, you're never done when you have a piece of archaeology.
Well, that's scholarly and scholar in science is all about. Mm-hmm. You must keep yourself, although it's quite hard, people are kind of getting used to stick to the word, whatever opinions are. I believe that that's what science is all about. I keep changing my mind if I'm convinced, and this is something that I was taught from my grandfather. He was my really main mentor in studying how to deal with the data. And I saw him changing his mind, and this was part of the joy of science. It wasn't torture. Oh, we have to kind of change our mind. No, this was something great to change a mind. One's mind. If you have information, of course, to do so. He changed his mind, for instance, just for example, about Beit Milo. He believed that the house of Milo, Beit Milo, needs to be searched in the area of the Ophel. In Jerusalem, right? And as we worked together, and we did work together really, 10 continuous years, and published together and worked together and excavate together. We excavated together at the Ophel. And he dropped this idea that the house of Milo needs to be searched at the Ophel area, and was convinced that it needs to be searched in the city of David, and probably that's where it is. So this is just an example.
So maybe explain to my listeners a little bit. There are two what they call different schools, if you will. There's Hebrew University, there's Tel Aviv University. There are some archaeologists who will say that you come from a biblical perspective, that you come from the historical Jewish perspective, and you expect to find something that will acknowledge the truth of the Bible, while other people would say, more from the Tel Aviv school, that they're not like that. How do you answer critics like that?
Well, it's not a critic. If somebody's want to blame us to be biblical archaeologists, that's what we are. But the explanation of this, what is a biblical archaeologist? In my opinion, it's very simple. You just don't ignore the Bible. That's it. The Bible deserves to be acknowledged and appreciated as at least an external historical document, and a very important one to be examined. And that's what we do. And this is biblical archaeology is all about. Like when you search and excavate and study the land of Israel, and the ancient Near East altogether, you take the Bible in your you just read the Bible as the most important historical document, but it's not like believing in the Bible as is, every word is, that's it. Like it needs to be 100% correct. No. In order to be critics, in order to be examined, in order to be studied, that's what it's all about. And of course, nobody thinks that the historical source, whatever it is, a historical document, needs to be 100% correct. Usually it's not. It's written by people, and people are never objective. They have their own beliefs, they have their own goals, etc., and they write for a purpose. So it needs to be uncoated, like, undressed, layer by layer, to see. And in archaeology, it's even easier, because we speak about tangible evidence that either yes or no can be found. And sometimes you have very zero chances to find things, and sometimes you are astonished by the preservation of what is found. Although if you needed to guess, you wouldn't give it that high chances to be preserved. And I believe that in Jerusalem, this is one of our greatest achievements, that we showed that the preservation of remains from the first temple period, King David and Solomon in Jerusalem, are preserved to such a high extent that we have never guessed. And actually it was kind of belief, a general belief, that almost none of these periods either never existed. Okay, that's what we talk about, the minimalist, that say no evidence, so it never existed, but we said, for some, we just showed that it does exist. And for a long period of time, that the absence of evidence proved like non-existence. This is entirely incorrect. And we showed that it does exist, and most likely existed. Like, that's what it was.
That the absence of proof is not proof of absence.
Absolutely. We have to be very careful about that conclusion, that the absence of evidence wouldn't lead us to very serious errors of conclusions. So especially in Jerusalem, we showed that, for instance, at the Ophel area, you just almost at the same level of the present road that you can see traffic all over, running all over, day and night, just less than a meter below this level, you can start find monumental construction, from King Solomon's time. And that's there. And it's not just a wall. We talk about buildings, city wall, a city gate, towers, fortress. And all these we can prove now that we talk about constructions constructed back as early as the 10th century BC. In other words, King Solomon's construction, as the Bible describes.
How do you prove the time period? There are no coins from that time. Coins don't come for hundreds of years later. So there's pottery, and you've been in the news recently because of some bullae that you found. Isaiah the prophet, maybe?
Yes, maybe it's okay. In the 8th century and the 7th centuries BC, we're talking about King Hezekiah's time and later. They used to seal documents. And now we know also seal bags that contained whatever precious material or whatever. Maybe food. I mean, it's not only precious. The seals were used to seal, just to show who could maybe produce the products, or some administration control that needed some people to have sealing seals, and they sealed these fabric bags, which we found the imprints on the other side of these bulla. I mean, people who didn't know about how it works. Like these seal impressions are very tiny. We're talking about less than a centimeter clay that was impressed when it was soft. You tied the strings around, for instance, a fabric bag, and then you tie it with a very soft clay. You take your seal and you push it into this soft clay, and it dries. And your name that was written inside on this seal is impressed on this bulla, on this seal impression. And you can read names, and you can see sometimes symbols of all kinds. So in the 9th century, they had only, in these seals, they used only symbols of all kinds. But in the 8th century, they used to write their names, or not only their names, but also their father names, sometimes even the grandfather's names. Wow. 3 generations in one little tiny seal. And of course, it sometimes left and can be read very easily in ancient Hebrew on these seal impressions. So we were very lucky to find seal impressions, dozens of them. And this is also thanks to now a new method. Sounds very ridiculous that we found this method only recently, after 2000, when this large project of sifting the debris that was thrown out from the Temple Mount. You probably heard about the destruction that Muslims did the Waqf did on the Temple Mount, and they excavated, tons of ancient fields were taken out of the Temple Mount and thrown out. And some of these piles of debris were found, and a whole project of sifting this material from the Temple Mount started.
I take people there. When I guide, we go to the Temple Mount sifting, and we spend like 2 hours there. And I've had tourists who have found things that haven't been seen, sometimes in thousands of years, an arrowhead or a coin or a nail from the Roman period. It's so exciting.
This is a most important project by itself, no question about this. And you can imagine, start sifting all these kind of dumps that were throwing out of the Temple Mount. It's entirely different conception than if you excavate, but still it's so important. And because of the immense amount of earth that they needed to sift, they developed a simple wet sifting using water. And they discovered that if you sift not only a dry sifting, but wet sifting, you kind of find 5 or even more times more small finds. Among them are these seal impressions. So we started to discover dozens of seal impressions with dozens of Hebrew names And we were so lucky to, of course, when you have, it's not like you sift everything because it's so costly to wet sift. I mean, this is a procedure that you need people to do so. And but since then we start wet sifting a very specific clean material that we have. We discovered many more fish bones. Suddenly we realized that people in ancient Jerusalem ate a lot of fish. We didn't realize that before, that such a large amount of fish bones, meaning that so much fish were eating in Jerusalem.
So that either means trade or people coming with fish, because for those of you who have not yet been to Jerusalem, it's not a port. It's in the hills in the middle of the country. It's not close to the coast.
Of course, and this is bringing fishes from the Dead Sea, from the Mediterranean and even the Red Sea. So it's a whole new picture of understanding, and what people ate in Jerusalem in these days. So a lot of information is added, newly added to our knowledge, and of course the new seal impressions are just the same. And we were so lucky to not only have such an omastic new list of names that we didn't know about people who lived in Jerusalem, and not only that, many people had seals in order to use them, but it's not like an ordinary, every other person had a seal. So these people are people of the administration and high officials of all sorts. So it's we have their names. Sometimes these are even women. It's not just men, but the majority, of course, are men. And among them, we have many people that, some in this case, sometimes we're very lucky to have people that we know from the Bible. And this is most astonishing. For instance, we found 2 seal impressions at the City of David excavation, at the summit of the city that were excavated in 2005 until 2008, at the area where we believe is the King David's palace. And in this structure, we found 2 seal impressions with 2 names that we are familiar from the book of Jeremiah. These are high officials, Yehochal ben Shelemiyahu and Gedaliah ben Pashchur, and these people are mentioned together in the same verse in the Bible. In Jeremiah, they were high officials of the time of King Hezekiah. And what is interesting, that Yehochal was asked by the King Hezekiah to go to the prophet Jeremiah and ask him to pray for the people, and also ask him, I believe, to stop talk about surrendering to the Babylonians. The prophet Jeremiah believed that the people needs and the king needs to surrender to the Babylonians, and of course people didn't want to surrender. I mean, the implications of surrendering, that means awful. I mean, that's it. Of course, being exiled, being getting to slaves, women are going to, families are going to be separated. I mean, this is horrible if you get lucky to stay alive. So once surrendering, you never know what's going to be the end of it. Of course, people didn't want to surrender. That's it. But Prophet Jeremiah kept trying to convince people to surrender. So he was kind of behaving like a traitor, getting people they were weak anyway. So even get them weaker and weaker. So he became to be considered like a traitor, walking
somewhat of a pariah. They were upset with him, even put him in a pit.
That's it, of course. So at the bottom line, they needed to arrest him. So there was no other option. So these Yehochal ben Shelemiyahu and Gedaliah ben Pashchur, they were one of the 4 ministers mentioned in Jeremiah chapter 38 that they were asked in the same verse. They were asked to look. They demanded at this point King Hezekiah to arrest him. So he said, "Okay, I can't. I mean, you're right. I mean, he at last he didn't want to. King Hezekiah, he didn't want to do that. But at the bottom line, he needed. I mean, he can't let it go on." And these people became very much alive with their signatures Like, what can you ask for more when you find these, seal impressions with these names of these people? And just as the Bible mentions, not only their name, as mentions with their father's name, and we find it in the excavation. So this is, you cannot argue with such a find when it comes to be so accurate. We got even more astonished when we found the seal impression of King Hezekiah. This happened, we published it in 2013. And this was not only his name. It says, Lechizkiyahu, belongs to Chizkiyahu, Achaz, meaning son of Achaz, king of Judea. That's what it says. It says Chizkiyahu, Achaz, Melech Yehuda. You cannot argue with that. And there are two registers, two lines. And in between these two lines, there is a symbol of a sun disk with wings, a winged sun disk, which is the symbol of royalty. But even more interesting, that in the seal impression, the wings are not raised up, but raised down. Raised down in an impression that means that God that has this, God meaning it's not like people may be wrong in understanding that by presenting a sun disk, like suddenly King Hezekiah worshipped the sun. Mm-hmm. No, it's not. The sun disk, the circle, is a general symbol for the supreme God. Okay? It's not for all the gods. It can be Phoenician, it can be Assyrian, it can be Egyptian. It's not a specific God. Everyone understands. It's a general expression of the mighty God, and every nation and they have their own. So, of course, in Judea, this is the God of Israel, the mighty God that gives a protection, and the wings are kind of bending down. Even further amazing is that on both sides of these wings, there are the symbols of life. The Ankh, we know this symbol from Egypt. Again, it's not an Egyptian at that time. It's a general symbol that is understood all over the region. And it means life, giving life. And of course, we know very well that King Hezekiah became extremely ill. And the prophet Isaiah cured him. This was a life-saving cure. And of course, King Hezekiah, by putting these two symbols of life, this is the expression of, I know my life were given by the supreme God. I mean, there is no argument about understanding these symbols as they are put on the seal impression so clearly.
It's like his own little Baruch Hashem, his own little thank God.
Yeah, thank God for keeping me alive. And when you read, and the even more fantastic was when we realized that just a meter aside, we found another seal impression that has a symbol of a grazing doe, although partially preserved. The grazing doe is a symbol that was quite common among the seal impressions that we have of these high officials and important people. And this means prosperity, okay? This is a symbol of prosperity that was quite common at the time. So we have that seal impression, specific seal impression. It's broken in its upper part. And what was really damaged was mainly the grazing doe. But there are two registers, two lines that are preserved on the lower part of the seal impression. And it says, La Yesha'aya, probably on the left side, is a fingerprint that was holding this seal impression when it was still soft and sealed. The finger, there is a finger that pushed push the lower left bottom of the seal impression. So the very end of these lines is damaged. And this is quite horrible because, okay, never mind Leshaya, it probably was Leshahu, and the Vav at the very end was damaged. But then it says Navi, and it means prophet, but we need the very end of this word. And in Hebrew, it's the Aleph. And the Aleph was pushed by the fingerprint just as well. So we kind of miss the option that the Aleph was there. We cannot, some people say that they can see the very end of whatever may be an Aleph there, but I believe it's more of a wishing.
Wishful thinking.
Exactly. They like to see, I don't know, but we couldn't prove that we see an end of any word there. And it was pushed by the fingerprint, and we are left with Leyeshayahu Navi Nun Bet Yud, which is still gives a lot of highly probability to the word Navi, prophet, but still it doesn't prove we need the Aleph. So we left with, with our appetites, taste, and we don't have the full proof. But then again, we ask ourselves, what are the chances that in this assemblage of royalty, that we have the still impression that there is no argument about that. This is 100% proof. We have the still impression of King Hezekiah, and just a meter aside, we have the still impression of may have been the prophet Isaiah, and we say, no, it's not the prophet Isaiah, it's somebody else with the name Navi. This sounds kind of impossible.
It's important, I just want to point out to my listeners, that this is found in context, as opposed to, let's say, the Temple Mount sifting, which everything was all in turmoil because it was dumped. This is in a controlled dig and found in context, because layering is the key when it comes to archaeology. So what you're doing here, finding it in situ, as they say, is hugely important for archaeology.
Absolutely. That makes a whole difference. When I hesitate about this just being a family name, Navi, Nun Bet Yud, okay, it's option. It's an option. But then again, the context, just as you said, the context is so important. We talk about an clean, sealed archaeological context of the 8th century, of a dump that was dumped from a royal structure, and it's stratified, and it was very accurately excavated. Every item known by its exact height and location. There is no argument about the archaeological context. We're talking about a scientific archaeological excavations. And of course, we knew that we're going to send it to wet sifting. Everything was very accurately registered as we used to. So this is a huge difference than just, finding things without in context. That's why, of course, we shout out and cry out about the damage that they do in the Temple Mount. Once they take out, without registration, without very stratified and skilled archaeological excavations, of course, a lot, almost every information about whatever these items can give us in their context. Of course, we try to save whatever it's possible, and this all the project with the wet sifting is all about, to save whatever is possible. But this is far from what needs to be done. Of course, this is the distraction. It is a huge distraction. So we talk about our excavations, which are scientific excavations, and the finding of the Bullae of Isaiah in archaeological context of the 8th century. And we talk about, just a meter aside, from King Hezekiah. And these two people, the relations between King Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah, these relations are extremely close. I don't think that I don't know, maybe Elisha and Eliyahu, they were that close. Maybe. Mm-hmm. I don't know. But it's not like if you read the Bible, you read Kings second, and you read about let's say chapters 18, 19, 20, and you read about the close relationship between these two people. It's extremely, I think I counted 14 times that they mention the same verse. Wow. So it's like King Hezekiah keeps consulting the prophet Isaiah, and of course Isaiah cures Hezekiah, etc., etc. So finding these two persona at the same context at such a distance and say, no, it's not that Isaiah, it's more than unlikely.
Do you have a personal favorite aha where you found something? Or there's been so many things that you've found over the years that have just brought the history of thousands of years into the palm of your hand?
True. What I love the best is the context. When I see it all, when I see that the structures are revealed, and to see whatever comes from their context. It doesn't have to be something. And when 2013 we excavated the Ophel, and in our first week of excavations, we planned half a year kind of, and we excavated 5 months. And the first week of excavations, we revealed a treasure of gold and silver jewelry, and of the Byzantine period, just 50 meters to the south of the southern wall of the Temple Mount compound. This is amazing. And one of the items was a large gold medallion, 10 centimeters in diameter. And more amazing is that very clean, gold. It's not. It's very clean and very clear. It's not the erosion doesn't work on the gold, and
it doesn't tarnish like silver or other things.
Absolutely. So it looks like new. And on that, when I looked at it as it was lying in the ground, it was very clearly seen a 7 candles menorah. On the side, there was a shofar, and on the other side, something that looks like a Torah scroll. But this was amazing because we never had a Torah scroll as a symbol at the side of a 7 candles menorah. So this was something enigmatic, a new symbols that to be aware of. But nevertheless, to see such very clear Jewish symbols on these insides on this menorah, on this medallion, this was amazing. But when you asked, I was of course excited. I was intrigued, and this was a new. Many questions rose asked at the time, what it was doing there, what is the nature of the treasure. The gold, of course, it's always fantastic to find gold, but it's okay. When you are an archaeologist, it's more than just the gold thing. And so we had lots of questions. We kept it as a secret for 5 months, and I sent scholars to sit in the library and study it all. Yes or no, we have a Torah scroll symbol, first time in Israel to really be proven to be a Torah scroll. At the bottom line, it was realized this symbol was very common in the Jewish community in Rome at that time, not in Israel. And this treasure was likely a combined effort of people from Israel and from Rome, most likely at the time when the Persians at the time conquering Israel gave a unique option for, after many years, dozens, centuries actually, that Jewish people were not allowed to come and settle in Jerusalem. It was the first time that such an option was given by the Persians, and this option was open and closed like for 15 years at the beginning of the 7th century CE. And maybe this is exactly, and it was proven by the 36 golden coins that we have of 8 emperors of the Byzantine Empire, that the latest coin gave us, of Heraclius, gave us the option to say that most likely this was exactly this opportunity that was given to the Jewish, and they came to the Ophel with a plan, and then they had to run for their life, hid this treasure in the ground, and then that's nobody and never came back.
So just to give my listeners a little historical context, the Romans, they destroyed the temple in the year 70. They sit until about 324 when Constantine turns to Christianity and the Eastern Roman Empire becomes the Byzantine Empire. And then in 614, though, the Parthians, Persians come in, and for 14 years they take over. The Christians, the Byzantines, wrest it back, 628, but then in 638, the whole thing is over because the Muslims, who have been watching the Parthian Persians and the Byzantine Empire fight each other for many, many years, take over both empires because both empires have weakened each other, and in like a 20-year blitz, take over virtually the entire Middle East and a good part of what we now call Southern Europe. So it is in this time period where maybe what you're saying is the Jews had a brief flickering of hope because we initially sided with the Persians, but then they betrayed us, even though we were backing them against the Christians who didn't allow the Jews to live in Jerusalem for the most part. And so maybe, just maybe, this is giving like a human picture. The Jews were there for a little bit, came back, and we're also now involving, as you said, the Jews of the diaspora, perhaps some of the wealthier Jews who had already been who were in the diaspora, who are now getting re-involved in Israel. And maybe these coins, along with the menorah, which is a symbol of Judaism, much before the Star of David, maybe what you find, as you said, the gold is the least important part of it. It's the symbolism and the sight and the find and the timing and everything else.
Wow, Eve, you describe it so beautifully. Nobody could do it better. I can assure you. That's exactly what happened. And this is an opportunity of archaeology to make a tangible option for something that you wouldn't believe. Because such a short period of episode in the history of Jerusalem, it's very hard to find in layers and to find such a treasure. Of course, the gold is the less most important thing of the whole story. Now it's presented it shows in the Hebrew in the Israeli Museum. Everybody can see it. It's a beautiful piece of work, and it has other jewelry that are, beautiful, highly skilled artifacts. But this is not what important. What important is this option to make tangible such a episode in the history of Jerusalem. But you asked me but it's not like I didn't sleep after I found this gold. It was not that. Of course, I realized that it's so important. We have to watch, gold after all. But this was a fantastic find, which we felt very privileged to find. But again, it's not like we didn't sleep. Something very strange happened to me when we realized that we found the seal impression of King Hezekiah. I couldn't sleep. And I said, wow, Eilat, what's the problem? Okay, important find. It's not the first important find. But then I felt something very heavy. Like, I felt that it's something is more than just a find. I felt something very heavy on my shoulders.
What, almost like a burden?
It was like something that at first I didn't realize how heavy the responsibility or the privilege of our finding. And then I couldn't really sleep, and I said, "What's your problem? What's the problem?" And then it happened that when I start reading, I read about the seal impressions of that period again and again, and I read what. Actually, my teacher, Professor Avigad, Nachman Avigad, who was like, these uncles that I was used to tell you about, and he was also my teacher. And I was the last student that he examined and he gave me not my doctorate, it was my master's. He was the last. And I begged him to do so. And he agreed at last. He didn't agree with me on many things. We argued, and this was fine. But he was a great scholar, and a great friend of my grandfather's. Used to come to his house all the time.
He was also one of the main excavators of the old city of Jerusalem post-67, after 1967. A lot of what we see there that was found, the Jordanians had destroyed most of the Jewish quarter, but what was found there, a lot of it was from him.
Well, the whole excavations of the upper city, the Jewish quarter, of course, it's his. Great archaeologist, but also great epigraphist. He published a lot about ancient epigraphy and seal impressions just as well. Mm-hmm. He said, actually, he was quoted while visiting my grandfather's house, saying that he wishes. He said it a year before he died. He wishes to find a seal impression or a seal of one of the Judean or of the Israelite or Judean kings. And such a seal impression in archaeological excavations, I'm not talking about, the market, antiquities market. I'm talking about excavations. That's what's most important. So such a seal impression or a seal of such a king was never found in his lifetime. And I said, wow, this is the first time that I got the privilege that Professor of God was wishing for to himself. So, yeah, I got a good reason to not sleeping at night. And this is such an important or most important item, because until then, there is no item that was found that we can say belong to one of the Israelite or Judean kings, and we can really show that the king himself, there is no question about that. It is a personal item. The seal of the king is a personal item. It cannot be given to anyone because it's a seal that can make a life or death possible. It's the most important seal.
Like in the book of Esther, when we see the seal that the king, that Achashverosh gives to Haman, that means that's it. This is the stamp of the king. This is the word of the king.
Of course, so it needs to be given. I mean, the king took it out from his finger. So so this is as closest as we could get until now to one of these kings. Not just proving that they existed and the narrative, the biblical narrative is accurate as
and
possible.
that Jerusalem was the capital, which even some people would say today wasn't. All these things.
All these.
And the literacy and the central government. You don't write something if nobody can read it. So there must have been a high level of literacy among the Judeans as well.
The administration, the actual royal quarter, everything that the Bible says probably existed. But then again, come as close as the personal, private, tangible ability. So that's why. So it took me a day to feel how kind of, quote, heavy, unquote, it is to find such a thing that not only proofs, it's not like we needed so many proofs, but it proved the narrative, the biblical narrative, but also comes so close to personality, so personal.
Like the past touches you all the time.
So, well, that's, but then again, I very much, I believe that our real contribution is not by an item or items, it's by the general visible remains that we have revealed, showing people that are coming to Jerusalem nowadays, they can go to the Ophel area and visit and go into structures that were built by King Solomon. And we can prove it, and we published book after book, the scientific publication after the whole procedure of processing the finds in laboratories is according to what we know. And we now show that not only the 10th century exists, BC we talk about, 10th century time of King Solomon existed in Jerusalem, and such royal constructions were built at that time, that even more we can show that layers within the 10th century, not at least to divide the 10th century into 4 different sublayers, and show the change in pottery, and show the change in the gradual stratigraphy and the layers that were within these structures. So now that's what we do. We show that. And I believe that we made a significant progress in the last 10, 15 years that we excavate Jerusalem at the city of David, at the summit of the city of David and the Ophel area. We show that the 10th century was a very active century. Not only such royal structures were built, but the life in them contained seal impressions and the pottery and glyptics of all kinds, showing that it's an international activity all over the Mediterranean, the Aegean, the Cyprus, let's say Mesopotamia, Egypt. It was a royal activity in this, coming from the center of Jerusalem at that time. It's not such an unimportant place. It is a very extremely important place that conducts international relationships with all the surroundings. And also, whatever you can see in your eyes. I mean, walking with this city wall that circles the Ophel area, the buildings that are relating to him, abutting this fortification line.
Perhaps the water gate, as you've said, that brought the water up from the Gihon spring up to the Temple Mount. No? No.
It's you have to separate. The spring is down at the city of David, and this we have the gate of the spring. This is Shar Ha'ain. What we have is Shar Ha'maim, and the whole area of the Ophel and the area of the Temple Mount didn't have water sources. They needed to be supplied by the water cistern, immensely large water cisterns, also in the area of the Temple Mount itself. If we speak about the huge cisterns in the area of the Temple Mount, and people ask me, do you believe that it's still possible to find the Ark of the Covenant and so on? And I say, look, I believe it's there because the options to hide things in these huge cisterns underground, the Temple Mount area, these are countless. I mean, the option is there. And I'm so convinced that they didn't kind of took these treasures of the temple and try to run away, miles. It didn't work. No. Why should they? They hide it in these so numerous places that were very well very accessible in the Temple Mount itself.
So you're talking about before the destruction of the first temple in minus 586, that the things that have never been found and didn't go back into the second temple from the first temple period, not just the Ark of the Covenant, meaning the tablets that Moses got from Sinai, or the staff, or the little jug of man, all those special things that didn't come back. You think they're hidden still somewhere on the Temple Mount?
Still, that the Muslims do not let excavations been taking place on the Temple Mount for many centuries. So I do believe that archaeology is much more simpler. I mean, in such a place where with such caverns and cisterns and to hide precious items, the most logical place is just hide it there and not try to travel and escape with it miles and miles. No, well, it's there. I believe it's there.
So we call it the City of David, and you mentioned a lot about Solomon. Would the coup be for an archaeologist to find something that says David on it, something that says House of David was found up until Dan in the northern part of Israel? There's a tremendous battle which has ramifications much greater than archaeology. Was there a David? Was there a House of David? Was he King of Jerusalem? That has, for Christians and for Jews and any Bible believers, this is a huge part of the story. Is that what the archaeologists who are working in Jerusalem, would that be like the cherry on the cake?
Well, you're talking about an archive. And the archives are there. Yes, it's not, we know where the archives should be. It's not just the option to excavate in Jerusalem. That's what we need. In the City of David, there was a whole story back in the 80s that ultra-Jewish Orthodox didn't let Professor Shiloh, Yigal Shiloh, the late Professor Shiloh, continue excavations in Area G, the City of David. I was part of Professor Shiloh's team. I learned my field experience with his extremely high-skilled expedition members. And my experience is there, which I really appreciate greatly, because that's what gave me the option to excavate later on, get a highly skilled experience. And they stopped his excavations. And he only started revealing such an archive. His still impression of another figure, which we talk about, a biblical figure, is Gemariyahu ben Shaphan, the well-known scribe. So the archive is there, and he excavated only 1 meter of whatever can be huge room containing, who knows, hundreds of such seal impressions and other items of look, in Jerusalem, papyrus documents most likely wouldn't preserve. I mean, because of the
organic material wouldn't survive that long in the wet environment of Jerusalem.
It's not dry enough. Jerusalem weather wouldn't allow that. But again, look,
so what happened to the archive? So he only investigated a little?
No, but he had to compromise. And such a very large cement wall was built over it. And that's the situation nowadays. Of course, I do wish and hope and pray that very soon, better sooner than later, that this cement wall will be removed. But it doesn't seem that that's what's going to happen.
Well, who has the power to do that? And because you're talking about a priceless treasure of the history of Jerusalem behind a cement wall, how did the ultra-Orthodox still maintain the responsibility for that?
They declare this area as the Jewish cemetery from the Middle Ages, and there is no power, not now in Israel, and I don't know when it's going to be, that can remove them from this declaration. Look, in Jerusalem, people were buried everywhere. But I believe that one day it will be possible to remove this cement wall with the agreement of this or disagreement. I don't know, because it's very clear that excavations can take care of them. If some burial will be revealed during excavation, it can be appreciated and taken and removed. It's not like it's something that cannot be done. And if there are burials there, here and there, I don't know. I don't think that there is an orderly cemetery there. But burials here and there, it's all over Jerusalem. Sure. So it can be solved. It's not like an unsolved issue. It can be solved, but I don't think that the government of Israel will deal with it anytime soon. They have enough, problems as they are. But in the future, I believe that not only that it can be done, it should be done.
Wow, so it's so challenging to dig in Jerusalem. It's not just like going anywhere else, because you do have the politics. You have the issues with the Muslims who are either not allowing or even destroying whatever they can that shows that the Jews have a connection to Jerusalem. You have ultra-Orthodox Jews on that side who are very, very sensitive to disturbing in any way the rest of those who have been buried a long time ago. You have the politics in terms of who controls different parts of Jerusalem. You have Israeli archaeologists, unfortunately, who are also saying that we shouldn't be digging there. It's a maelstrom.
Yes, it is. And you counted just some.
Just some. That was just a little at the top of the list.
I can assure you. Excavating Jerusalem, many excellent archaeologists, also in the Hebrew University for many years, do not like to come any near Jerusalem archaeology. And for many, many years, I found myself the only one who does it. Wow. And it's not easy. It's not easy not being the only one. From the countless obstacles you just counted. And really, it's not the end of it. It's like fighting all the time against everybody. Although you think, wow, it's so important. And once you get, and this is not the budget issue. Sometimes the budget issue is the last on the list, right? Yes, sometimes they have the budget, but they don't let you excavate for raising all obstacles. And we are, for many years, the only non-governmental excavations taking place in Jerusalem. Usually it's on behalf of the government, mainly, the Antiquities Authority, and they excavate all over. And once they excavate. They are the authority. But we are the only excavations taking place for 50 years now in the area of the foot of the Temple Mount and the Ophel area. And I insisted also at the summit of the City of David that the excavations of the Hebrew University, I believe that universities excavating Jerusalem, this is so important that it won't be just the authority option to excavate Jerusalem. And that's most of the excavations, like the majority, 99% is the authority. So we kind of suffered and still suffer, huge suffer on that issue as well. Because when you are part of the authority and the one who decides and the one who inspects and the one who supervises, then it's easier. And if you are out of that system, you are not part of the governmental excavations. So they supervise you, they raise the obstacles to you. It's much easier to make your life horrible.
Not give you the permits.
Yes, not give you the permits. And for many years. Also to areas which I wish to excavate for many years and still don't get permission, like King Solomon's palace. For years, I'm asking and not giving the option to do so.
You think you know where King Solomon's palace was?
Yes, it's not that much. It's look, if we have the city, the wall, the fortification line that we revealed it, that surrounds the Ophel area. So the Ophel by itself, the termination itself, the term itself is the Acropolis. Okay, so everything you excavate inside that fortification line is part of the royal quarter. When you talk about the palace of King Solomon, it's not like the palace itself, it's the palace complex. So everything on the other side, and of course I know, because it's not a big deal. We know the area, we know the remains, we know the structures. And for years I'm asking and not given the permission because the authorities doesn't give, and their main excuse is very, very weak one. Is like the area is excavated enough. They're not convinced that the first temple period remains will be revealed there. All kinds of it's not that serious. Mm-hmm. But anyway, bottom line, they don't give us to excavate. And this is misfortunate. And of course, archaeologists, very good archaeologists, they don't want to come any closer to these fightings, constant fightings. Who wants that? Mm-hmm. And for many years, I found myself very much on my own, very much on my own, like a dreamer. Okay, she believes she knows where King David's palace is. Fine. And where King Solomon's palace remains here. I believe that this at least changed. Like we proved that most of what we believe and actually revealed. And the evidence is there. We proved tangible evidence. I mean, facts. And now it's not like people you kind of think that I'm a dreamer or fantasizer there. Mm-hmm. It's not. Well, it's different. Nowadays, it's a bit different, but it's not easier. It's not easier. And I do believe that will change as well. I like to believe, and soon. Because more and more people see what we find, and they can see it. These are facts, and they will let us continue our excavations as we need to do. I mean, this is really something that we need to continue.
How many students go out with you? Do you have like your own group that digs with you?
I have, usually when I get the option to excavate, I don't wait a day. That's the permission is given. It's winter, it's summer, no matter what, I go. It's not like a regular excavations, mm-hmm. usually getting a connection with universities and excavating during the summer when the students are on vacation. Mm-hmm. No, we excavate when we can, in the snow even, and we did. But and I have a beautiful partnership with the Ambassador College, but with people that started the relationship. It started with my grandfather and Mr. Armstrong, Herbert Armstrong, back in 1968 in the Temple Mount excavations. And we continue these relations with the Church of God, the Philadelphia Church of God, and the Ambassador College. And the college students, when they can, they come and assist us. This is a huge assistance. Their participation, without them, I believe that my excavations would look entirely different. Because they are full of enthusiastic, they are hard workers, they believe, they are eager to excavate, and of course that shows in the excavations. So what I do with or without them, it's entirely different. And of course we have other volunteers as well as paid workers, which are great just as well. But to have the students from the Ambassador College continuously coming to every project and every excavations which I conduct, it's and of course the encouragement just as well when you have partners that are following with you all the time. It is, the time of great discoveries just as well as we are fighting, and they don't leave you at any time. This is great assistance and encouragement, which I appreciate very much.
So if somebody's listening and they're an archaeological student, not necessarily in the Ambassador College, is there any way for them to ever join a dig of yours?
Of course, they are so welcome. People from all over the world, we are very much happy to have them joining us. Of course, it's not for a day or two. The least people can join us is for a week, but we welcome, and as long as you are healthy, to 120, but you have to bring an insurance from a doctor that you are healthy, and at any time, at any age, joining us as long as we excavate. Of course, now we end our last excavation season at Passover Eve, but as you just see that we excavate, and you're most welcome to join us.
So one last question. Your children, anybody interested in archaeology?
I have 4 children. My daughter is just, my daughter's name is Madaba. She's the only one in the world that her name, I believe, I didn't meet any other person that his name is Madaba. Madaba.
Named after the famous map, the place.
This is the first map that shows, although it's Byzantine time, but it's in Jordan, in the floor of the Byzantine church in the town of Meidva. In Hebrew, it's in the Bible. You can read Meidva.
I was there, jumping up and down out of excitement a few years ago.
This is fantastic because it's such a beautiful mosaic map that describes the land of Israel and, of course, Jerusalem. And I called my daughter the name of Meidva, and it was very unusual. I hesitated. And, back then, 40 years ago, I asked my grandfather, maybe it's too much, maybe not. You know what? Back then, we didn't have cell phones and so please go and investigate what is the meaning of the word Meidva. And he sent me back a note saying, don't worry, it's a beautiful name. It means running, calm, beautiful water. Oh. Yes. So I called my and she is so proud of her name. Although both of us still need to visit the site of Meidva in Jordan, but and then I have 3 other sons. None of them is archaeologists, but they all great fans, and they like what I do, and they are very curious. But they have their genes. You know how I know? Mm-hmm. Because one of my sons, Deville, he in his kindergarten. The kindergarten lady, she's asked me, she said, you know what happened today? He was playing in this sandbox, but he didn't play inside the sandbox, but around it. So he kind of played, and he revealed and discovered an earlier sandbox. Since they changed the size and the direction of the sandbox, there was an earlier sandbox, and he discovered it. And said, wow, this is beyond my, no, don't tell me that. I mean, no way we have such genes. This was a great story, but they didn't continue that.
But maybe your grandchildren, like you took from your grandfather, so maybe it skips a generation.
Who knows what's going to be. Okay. Anyway, it is a very recommended occupation, profession, although not much money into it. Mm-hmm. So if you want to become rich, don't go to archaeology. Right. But then again, it gives you such a joy, and it's hard work, but it's a occupation which you have all reasons to love.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Eilat Mazar. And you should know that I have a picture of you with that gold medallion that when I guide in the Ophel, I show everyone. And your smile is so broad. It is so clear that you love what you do, that you love what you've given to humanity, what you have found that hasn't been seen in so long, that enriches all of us, especially those of us who believe in the Bible, but not only, those of us who love history and want to learn what's gone before, especially in a city as dear to so many as Jerusalem. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's my privilege.
Okay, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Eve Harrow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. You can always write to me. Take care, everybody. Goodbye for now.
For her to say that because of her discomfort with the prime minister, that she is not even going to come to Israel to receive this prize,
Tune in to an exclusive interview with Michael Medved, one of the most successful Jewish talk show hosts of America, has to say about Natalie Portman and the scandal about her refusing to accept a $2 million prize in Israel.
I think because she is Israeli originally, and I know my family in Israel always looked at Natalie Portman. Yes, she is on the left, and she